Hello, this is Diann from Diann Abroad. The show is In the Know, her podcast show. I'm an international solo nomad, an author, a travel blogger, and a photographer. And I'm here to provide you writing tips, travel tips, and my views of life from savvy and thoughtful to quirky and humorous. The music that you hear, Jazz Infusion piece, was written for me by Rafael Javadov, an incredible Russian violinist. We thank him for that music, of course. And I hope you enjoy the show. This is Diann Schindler for In the Know. I have a special guest today. This is so exciting. It's 1 week before Thanksgiving, and Robert Goddard, otherwise known as Bob, has agreed to allow me to interview him today. This is such a treat. I met Bob at the Florida Annual Writers Conference in Orlando a couple of weeks ago, and he and I ended up sitting at the same table, the thriller table. He's going to tell you about his thriller that he's written, and I'm in the process of writing a thriller, but we sat there and chatted, and we kind of ran into one another the whole weekend, and I learned a lot about him, and I was intrigued. I read his poetry, and I said, please, 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 will you be on my podcast show? And he agreed. So let me give you a brief introduction, and then we can listen to Bob. Bob grew up in Georgia. He had 4 years in the U.S. Air Force. He earned an associate degree in science from Middle Georgia State University and a bachelor's of business administration from Georgia College. He married his college sweetheart, Priscilla, and they have 4 sons and 5 grandchildren. And most of his business career was spent in long-term care, in the long-term care industry, first as a financial officer and later as an owner. He retired in December of 2012, and now he's pursuing a writing career. Welcome to In the Know, Bob.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too. I have a list of questions for you, but the first thing I would like for you to elaborate, if you will, on your background. I mean, I just talked about a few things, but I'm very impressed with your background. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I grew up in a small town in Georgia and discovered the pool hall when I was 16 and almost flunked out of school because I spent all my time there.
Oh, boy.
But when I graduated, couldn't find a job in that little town and joined the Air Force and was spent 4 years on remote sites in different places doing work that was classified top secret. And when I got out, my mother had moved to another town, and I had no place to go except to go live with her and her new husband. And it was in a strange town where I didn't know anyone. But I've written a poem related to that I might get to later. But anyway, after that, I worked for the telephone company for a little while and then saw that it wasn't getting anywhere, and knew that I had to get a college education to improve myself. So I left a car I had that I couldn't afford, parked on the side of the road, and went to college.
Oh, and, that's an interesting way to enroll. Well, that was serious. You were committed. I'm impressed by that.
Yeah, it's deferred gratification. I knew I couldn't afford the car working for the phone company. I knew I couldn't afford it in college, and it was holding me back. You know, all my money was going for car payments and gas and insurance and everything. So I did without a car for 4 years in college, and it didn't hurt a bit. I participated in a lot of activities. I was in a play every quarter, and met my wife on stage, in fact, during a rehearsal. And got that business degree and went to work as a CPA and worked mostly on clients in the healthcare industry. And then one day I got an offer from a large company to come to work for them. And I did. And that led to my ultimately being an owner of nursing homes and, a part owner. And that's what I retired from after many years. Since I retired, I've begun writing. I've always wanted to write. Matter of fact, when I was in junior college, I wrote a little one-act play that ran about 10 minutes. It was performed by the drama club that I started. It was a brand new junior college and didn't have any of the standard clubs, so I started a few for them. But they performed it for me, and then After that, I wrote a couple of short stories. One was science fiction, and the other one was about a hunting adventure. And I never did anything with them. I wrote them and set them aside. Then 2001, I began working on a novel, but I bought a lot of books. I knew I had to read what other writers were doing. I bought about 300 books over a 3-year period and read them all and gave them to libraries afterward. But I had to see what other writers were doing, what they were writing about, how they were going about it. And of course, I studied some how-to books and all that. And my first novel was called Upper House Conspiracy. It was published in 2006.
Now, what's the title of it again? Upper House?
Upper House Conspiracy. Upper House being the Senate.
I see. I see. Okay, good. Go ahead.
And I've got a little short synopsis of it that I'll read to you if you don't mind.
Well, go ahead. Go right ahead.
While pursuing a scandal story for his tabloid, Will O'Brien, a discredited former investigative reporter, discovers an aging senator's recent death by heart attack was an assassination. He makes that claim in his weekly article, which produces a mysterious informer who tells him of an incredible conspiracy to assassinate senators in order to control the outcome of the midterm elections. O'Brien and DC detective Zalva Martinez pursue the conspiracy through a trail of murdered participants and witnesses, discovering a cabal of political fanatics with ties to one of our oldest European allies. Desperate to save the last remaining witness, they fall into a trap set by the conspirators, a trap from which escape seems hopeless. And there's a little blip here about why I wrote the book. Since the days of Teddy Roosevelt, the United States government has involved itself in the internal affairs of various nations around the world, clandestinely and overtly, to contain communism, protect our economic interests, and to promote world peace. Will that come back to haunt us? According to an old saying, what goes around comes around. And now we've just gone through 3 years of allegations that the Russians have interfered with our elections. So, what went around has come back.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in your synopsis. What ally were you speaking about in your synopsis? France?
Right.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake because all the liberal editors and agents love France.
Well, let me ask you this now. Is this the book that you had, tell me, is this the book that is no longer on Amazon? You took it off?
Right, I took it off because I didn't know it at the time, but there's another writer, an English writer with the same name, Robert Goddard. His name is Robert John Goddard, but at that time he was using just Robert Goddard, which I did too. And Barnes & Noble and Amazon and all the libraries that bought my book listed it under the other guy. If you could click his name on Amazon, it would show all the books he'd written along with my book. And a lot of people bought my book thinking they were buying his, and they expressed their displeasure in reviews, comments on the book. I had some good comments on it too, but I couldn't be sure how many books I was selling because they were good books or simply because there were mistakes on the buyer's part. So I just took it off. I took it off the market. I'm thinking seriously about redoing it and eliminating the reference to the party names and changing the country behind it and reissuing it.
Yeah, making it a little more nonpartisan. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think you should do that. I mean, the synopsis sounds fantastic. I can't believe, by the way, Bob, when I look at your background, a CPA, that's like what, left brain? CPA,
yeah, I guess. I don't.
And then you were involved in theater, and you're writing poetry, which we're going to get to in a minute. But you are obviously extremely talented and well-rounded, left brain, right brain, and also driven. I mean, when I think about that synopsis, I think about not only politics, not only foreign affairs, but also law. You had to, didn't you, include in that novel some scenes in the courtroom? Did you have to do that?
Oh, that's a play. I've written a play that is a murder trial.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'm back. I'm sorry for confusing myself and the audience. I'm sorry about that. Well, still, so here you are writing a play that also has to do with the courtroom. So I think about for me, that would be such a wide span of research I would have to do the play, the content of that play that you described to us, and also the novel that you have written. It's just very impressive. And that novel is also a thriller, right? It's a thriller.
Yeah, it is sort of. It's a long play. It's about 2.5 hours long, and it's a murder trial. And the jury comes from the audience. 12 people who volunteer. They actually sit on the stage, and they decide the outcome of the play. And of course, I've got
now, when was that? When did you do that again? Tell me the year.
I've just finished it this year.
Good. Oh, good.
Right. It really is.
Well, that is so fun because it's really interactive and it gets everybody involved.
Well, it came from a novel manuscript that I didn't publish, that I could not get an agent interested in, and the book, it was my very first novel, and I had a lot of superfluous information in it, a lot of things that didn't help the action move along. And but about the last quarter of that book was the murder trial as seen from a newspaper reporter's viewpoint.
Wow, that's
the hero of the book. So in the play, there is no viewpoint other than what the audience sees. So
that's right. Yeah, I understand that. Well, golly, I'm just, I'm keep saying golly, because when I met you in Orlando, we talked a little bit, but I am so smart to ask you to be on this show because I'm just so impressed with everything that you're doing. Now, I want to ask you, not only have you written plays and novels, and how many books have you written?
I have written 3 novels, only one published.
And what about those other 2? Are you going to get those other 2 published? What are you going to do?
Yeah, I'm going to finish them up this year. That's one of my plans for 2020. One is one I've actually finished, and I showed it to 6 agents, and all 6 of them said it didn't wind their clock, So yeah. I've got to make some changes to it. I think my hero is too passive, but I wrote a play based on the information on that plot. Mm-hmm. The book had actually 2 plots that kind of worked in tandem with the 2 main characters in each plot coming together about 2/3 of the way through the book and solving both plots. And so I took one of the plots and made a play from that, and that's called Seesaw. It's a 3-act play where a guy inherits a house in Charleston and discovers that the next door neighbor's missing wife is buried under the house, and all the things he was going to inherit, his uncle's estate, about $10 million. The estate is sued by the neighbor's husband, and so he's lost that, and then he loses a job that he came to Charleston to do, and then he has to fight to get it all back, and it's the mastermind behind the plot is a surprise. I don't want to reveal that.
Yeah, don't reveal the prize, that's for sure. Wow. The plot line, as you have described it, is pretty riveting for me. So I hope I hope I can read that sometime. That would be great. That would be wonderful.
You can read it anytime you want. I'll send you a copy.
I would love that, really. Now you've written poetry. I mean, one of the things that happened for those of you who are listening, one of the things that happened is after Bob and I kept running into one another, he said he'd written poetry and would I be willing to read his poetry? Well, my background is English. I know a little bit about English and poetry and something about writing. And so he brought to me 3 or 5 poems, I can't remember. And I took them back to my room that night and read them and was just very impressed. So now, because, it's, the poems are allegorical and it's iambic pentameter. I mean, so you have so much knowledge. Tell me how you got into writing poetry to begin with.
Well, in college, I had a really good poetry course, and I still have my textbook. Matter of fact, it's had about 20 issues since that date, but I still have my original, and I bought one of the most recent editions.
And have you written poetry all these years, or are you just kind of getting back into it now?
No, I'm just getting back into it. It's something that it doesn't take as long as a novel, and it's not as complicated as a play. And I was at my sister's house in Florida visiting her in Winter Haven, and they were feeding squirrels in the backyard and birds and things, but the squirrels were getting all the bird food. So my brother-in-law decided he would feed the squirrels separately. So he bought a sack of corn and started putting a piece of corn on a stake in the trunk of a tree. And he was thinking he was going to feed all the squirrels, but one squirrel took it over and wouldn't let any of the others eat.
And then you wrote the poem, The Alpha Squirrel.
Alpha Squirrel. I could see that the squirrel had, he dominated the tree. He wouldn't let any other squirrels on the tree. He would eat the corn. He wouldn't get out and do all the things he'd been doing before. And when the other squirrels would put out warning signals, like for hawks or anything around, he had begun to ignore those. So I decided to write a poem about it.
Can you read it for us?
I surely can.
Thank you.
The Alpha Squirrel. In neighbor's yard, the alpha male held sway and lorded over others of his kind, cavorted, foraged, gambled all day, and mated when it entered his mind. But now my neighbor spikes an ear of maize upon a small tree trunk at 9 each morn, and the alpha squirrel in a selfish craze does chase his mates away from tree and corn. No longer does he forage, play, or mate, for fear another will usurp his throne. So he resides in this dependent state, and now is slow and fat and all alone. And when the corn is late, begins to squawk, as now, but does not see the swooping hawk.
Gluttony. Is that what that's about?
Gluttony. Well, yeah, and that happens in real life in other areas. People get dependent on someone, and then they don't necessarily see what's coming down the road. When you give up,
they give up what's important to them, because the only thing that becomes important is the squirrel's food, and he'll let everything go to make sure he gets that food.
Right. You can easily become a tool that someone else is using when you become dependent on them.
A tool of somebody else's using. Yeah, I like that. Now, can you read another poem for me? And then when we do that, we're going to just take a little break. But do you have another poem that you'd like to read for us?
Yes, I'm going to read this one. Like I said before, my 4 years in the military was from 18 to 22, and I was stationed in places where there just weren't any women, and no way to get to town, no car, and while I was over there doing that, other guys my age were getting married, they were dating, having a good time. When I came back, like I said before, I went to a strange town where I didn't know anybody. And my stepfather would take me to town on Saturdays and drop me off, and I'd go to the pool room. And I would play pool and gamble for money until I was tired of it. Then I'd get out and walk the streets. Back in those days, people still shopped downtown. So the sidewalks would be crowded on Saturdays, lots of women, lots of them nicely dressed, good looking. And it just ate my heart out, because I didn't know any of them and didn't know any way to meet any of them. So I wrote this little poem, which is also allegorical. I'll read it. On looking back. When I was young and free and full of pop, I'd go downtown to roam and strut the street on Saturdays when women came to shop, and hope a lithe young beauty I would meet. Some were so beautiful my soul would ache, because I knew them not and never would. And sometimes after they passed, I'd take a look behind, admire, and wish I could. One day, a beauty looked back at me and smiled, then paused to view its store display. And I I stood as stiff as though a tree, and with a puzzled look, she strode away. For weeks afterward, I trod that same sidewalk, remorseful over my failure to act, this time resolved to woo and not to balk, but never saw again she who looked back.
That is so sad. Isn't that sad?
But don't you have something that you looking back on your past that you didn't do the right thing and you wish you had that opportunity back?
Yes, but it certainly wasn't as beautiful of imagery that you describe in this poem. I really like in the second stanza, the second line. Allow me, please. Some were so beautiful, my soul would ache because I knew them not and never would. Oh, that's I love that line. I mean, I hate it. You know what I mean? I hate it because not hate's too strong a word here, but it's like, it breaks my heart. And I wanted it to be romantic. I mean, I think it's a beautiful poem, but when I read it and you and I chatted about it in Orlando, I don't know if I told you this, but I thought, gee, I like romance it's kind of to end well, like in a novel, one of
Oh, yeah.
in a novel, all the romances are supposed to end well. Anyway, so I said to you, oh, well, maybe it was Priscilla. And you said, no, it wasn't Priscilla.
Long before I met her.
I would like to take a moment to tell you about a future podcast episode, a little teaser for all of you. I'll be interviewing Marilyn Atlas. Now, I met Marilyn, the same place I met Bob. I met her at the Florida Writers Conference a couple of weeks ago in Orlando. She's a film producer and a literary manager, a talent manager and a literary manager. She's an author and an award-winning producer. She has an extremely successful record of producing films for HBO and even the big screen. She co-produced the award-winning play entitled To Gillian on her 37th birthday. And this play was made into a film starring Michelle Pfeiffer and Peter Gallagher. She also has co-authored a relationship-based screenwriting guide called Dating Your Character. Marilyn Atlas's lists goes on and on and on. Her successes go on and on and on. They're just too numerous to mention here, but I'm asking you simply must tune into this interview. I estimate it to go live the week after Thanksgiving. I hope you'll join me for this special episode interviewing Marilyn Atlas. I wondered if you were thinking about putting your poetry together in a book.
I will one day. I've got a list of other topics. I keep a notebook handy wherever I'm at, and I get an idea, I'll write it down. I've got it divided into sections. One section for short story ideas, one for plays, another one for poetry. I've got at least a dozen more topics I want to write on poetry.
Yeah, well, you're awfully prolific. Now, is that what you're working on right now, or is it something special that you're working on right now?
Right now, I'm putting the final edits on both my plays. You don't get an agent to market your play for you. You have to market it yourself. You have to find somebody that's going to perform or produce the play, and I'll be working on that for a while. These two plays, I won't write another play for a while until I get one of these performed somewhere.
Well, so what do you do? How do you market that? What do you do? Do you go to a community theater and ask them to?
Well, yeah, you have to. You can Google different kinds of theaters on the internet. Like I Googled community theaters in Mississippi and got a long list. Every one of them in the state, but most theaters already have their season planned out and maybe the next one too. So even if I found one that would do it, it might be 2 years before one of them did it. There are all sorts of contests that you can enter. They're called for submissions.
Mm-hmm.
I belong to the Dramatists Guild, and they, on their website, they provide a list of opportunities. Theaters or performance groups that want a new play, they'll list with Dramatists Guild, and they make that information available. They'll tell you what kind of play they're interested in, how long they want it to be, and that kind of thing. And you just have to keep. It's like getting a novel published. You just have to keep sending it to agents until one of them bites.
Yeah, well, yeah, the thing is though, if you've written a novel, you can self-publish. But if you self-publish a play, it's not useful unless somebody actually performs it, right?
That's right. Plays aren't written to be published. They're written to be performed. And, the ones that are published are usually ones that have been performed many times and by famous writers, and people like to read them. I like to read plays. I don't have to see it performed. I've read all of Shakespeare's history plays, and I just love them. I've read most of them 5 or 6 times. But I just love drama. And it's tough to market it.
I'm excited about your playwriting and your screenwriting. I wanted to ask you then, because it leads me right into the Black Rose Theater Company that you mentioned to me in your bio. Can you tell us about that?
I was an alderman in Brandon for 8 years.
Now, what's an alderman? Tell me what an alderman is.
The Board of Aldermen runs the town. The mayor is a figurehead. The Board of Aldermen does all the hiring, firing, setting pay rates, and all the actions. The mayor is a figurehead. He signs important documents on behalf of the city, and holds a management meeting like once a week with all the department heads, make sure that they're all working out their own track. But he's like an executive director. But the aldermen run the show, and I was an alderman for 8 years. And I was having coffee one morning with the head of the local chamber of commerce, and he was saying, "Boy, we need to get something going around this town. There's nothing going on." I said, "Well, we could start a community theater." And he didn't know anything about that, but he said, "Well, if you'll start it, I'll put a notice in the paper about an organizational meeting." So he put the notice in the paper, and that weekend, that was on a Friday, that weekend I wrote the bylaws, and we had an organizational meeting about a week later, and 48 people show up, and we elected board members, and I was voted to be a board member and made president first year. And we opened our first performance in the courtroom. It was Anne Rand's play, The Night of January 16th. We performed that. And because I was president, it was kind of my baby. I went to every rehearsal and every play, every performance, and every cast party.
And it's still in operation. It's still in operation, isn't it?
It is. By the third play, we had our own theater building. I went around to key people around town and asked for $1,000 contributions for a building fund, and I raised a good bit of money that way. Did a bicycle ride. I raised $1,500 in pledges on a bicycle ride, and then I sold advertising for the first year in the program, and we got a good bit of money from that. But we were, and I guaranteed a loan for the building, and the theater bought an old abandoned building downtown, and we converted it to a theater.
Wow, you have done it all. You have done it all. The marketing, the writing, the poetry, the screenplay, the plays, the CPA. I mean.
Well, one day maybe something will come of it.
Well, that's, you're also humble. In a way, you're humble. In a way, you're not humble, Bob. That's what I like about you.
You don't know me.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because you told me a little bit about your background when we were in Orlando, and but not so much that I've learned about you today, and the rest of us have learned about you today. So this has been a really good treat. Now, I just wanted to say something. I don't know if this is appropriate, but, I'm going to say it anyway. We have 2 theaters here in Amelia Island, Florida. It's been around a long time. It's a great, big, beautiful building. It has 2 theaters in it, actually. One is the original theater, and then the other theater is much more full-blown. At the same time, we have another theater in town that is it's only been around, I think, maybe 5 or 6 years. And I think you and I should talk, because I know the owner of that theater, and they do some, I don't want to say experimental stuff. I don't know how to say this, but they do some plays written by people, that are not, published all over the world or all over New York City. So they do familiar plays, and then they do other plays as well. And, you and I should chat. I'm wondering if I could introduce you to the owners of this second theater. And it's a little place. It's only like seats 100, and it's very unique, and it's well attended. And so maybe there'll be an opportunity for you there for one of your plays.
Now, I have hopes that the Black Rose Theater will do my play next year, but their season's already picked, well, it has to be 2 years from now. Their season's already picked through then. But then again, I don't want to put a lot of pressure on, because they might think I'm trying to take advantage of the situation, that I was the founder, and
yeah. Well, how long has it been in existence? Has it been 28 years?
Yeah, I haven't had anything to do with it lately.
Yeah, but I think we ought to go to the 30th year anniversary celebration with the founder and do his play.
Yeah, that suits me.
Yeah, let's do that.
By the way,
yes.
My wife directed about a dozen plays for the theater over the years.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we were in drama together in college.
Yeah, that's so sweet.
Yeah, she turned out to be a really good director.
Yeah. Well, I cannot thank you enough. Look at what we have talked about. I have found out so much more about you and about your books, and your complicated and riveting plots, and your poetry and your plays. I just had a wonderful time. Now, I wanted to let the audience know, I'm going to, with Bob's permission, I'll have a link to his website, and I'll show you, he's a handsome guy. So we're going to have his photo on there, and his email, so you can talk to him and email to him. And also you can read more of his poetry, because I'll have a link to his website. Is that right, Bob?
Yes, you can click button under the page that says works. There's a button for each poem. Just click that button, and you'll get the poem. Okay,
good. Well, is there anything you'd like to end with here before we close out?
Well, just that I'm going to email you a copy of the Seesaw.
Yeah.
The 3-act play.
I would love that.
Yeah, and you can use that if you want to. You can show it to the person in Amelia Island that you're talking about.
Okay, I'll try that. Maybe after Thanksgiving I can get over there. Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and for those of you, please, if you like this program, if you like this episode, you can support it by writing a review and sending it to your friends, and subscribing to In the Know podcast show. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you, quote, seeing you on In the Know, and especially watch out for this Marilyn Atlas interview. Thank you so much.